have your Bibles. I hope you do. Yeah, Bill, we should mute channel 4. Or just all of them, but my mic would be fine. Yeah.
You're on.
I don't know where I am.
You're on.
Yeah, I think. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. We're in Genesis chapter 35, if you want to turn in your Bibles there. I feel all the shuffling for the moment. I know. Did you guys sense that as we were singing that, wherever you lead me, whatever it costs me? Those are big words. Man, that's definitely where I want my heart to be, but and that can, when you're surrendered to God like that, that's when God can pick you up as an instrument of His and use you for His glory. And that's kind of what we're seeing in Jacob as he becomes Israel, as he wrestles with God all night, and God asks him, "Who are you? What's your name?" And he says, "I am Jacob," and he owns the meaning of his name. I'm the deceiver. I'm the deceptor. I'm the heel catcher that my name aptly displays me as. And God says, "No longer shall you be called Jacob. You should be called Israel." Israel means, guys remember? Governed by God. Governed by God. And it's a beautiful name when you consider his life now surrendered. And that doesn't mean from that moment on, Jacob is Israel and there is no more Jacob, and Jacob doesn't rear his ugly head again, because we've read a few times that he has. And that old flesh wants to continue to creep up into our lives. You know it. You've experienced it. You've dealt with those things too. We all have. Jacob becomes Israel, but he still struggles with Jacob tendencies, right? And so do we at times. Today, we're kind of coming to the end of Jacob's story, although he's in the rest of Genesis, but kind of as not the key player anymore. We actually are going to transition from Jacob to Joseph as we read today, and the last 13 chapters of Genesis are focused on one man. On the last quarter of the book focused on Joseph and his life, and so we make that transition today. We're going to rewind to the beginning of chapter 35. We did cover a few verses last week, but just to pick up the flavor of everything, Genesis chapter 35, 1. Everybody with me?
Yes.
Then God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother." So God is wooing him back and calling him back to the beginning. Fezzik, we must go back to the beginning, right? Princess Bride reference, sorry. You'll hear that now and again. What's the other thing I quote often? Well, it's just Spurgeon and Princess Bride. That's my life. So anyway, we've got to go back to the beginning. Back to where God wanted him. Back to Bethel. Back to the house of God. And God is wooing him back after 20 plus years of Jacob on the lam. He is returning back to where he wanted him. And Jacob hears this time, verse 2. Jacob said to all his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments." This is a radical change on Jacob's behalf to say, we're making a fresh start. We're drawing a line in the sand. We're going to step over that line and we're never going to look back. No more idols. No more foreign gods. Jehovah God is not just a part of our lives. He is the whole of our lives. We're getting rid of all of the idols. We're making a change here. I wonder if Rachel, Jacob's wife, his favored wife, was still carrying her dad's idols at this point. Remember the whole scene where Laban busts into the tent and Rachel's like, "Excuse me, I can't stand up. It's my time of month." And she was sitting on the idols, the household idols of Laban. I wonder if this, so many years later now, is Rachel still carrying those household idols. And Jacob says, enough is enough. We're putting them all away. It says, purify yourselves, make yourself clean, set yourself apart, change your garments. That's kind of a scriptural reference when you're told to change your garments. It's an idea of a new beginning, a new chapter in life, a new change in character. Put on new clothes. Paul Harvey always said that the way you dress makes the man, and or something along those lines. And it was always curious to me that Paul Harvey always wore a coat and a tie to do his radio broadcast. I mean, he's in a radio booth by himself, but he always felt necessary to dress up, and that helped him set his frame of mind. And that's kind of the idea here. Change your garments, reset your mind. Make sense? You know how you feel when you buy a new outfit, that kind of idea. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me in the way which I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which are in their hands, and the earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them underneath the terebinth tree which was by Shechem. So as they set out, they bury all of the idols, including all of the household gods. The earrings, that's interesting. It wasn't that having your ears pierced was necessarily a bad thing, but the earrings probably had something to do with idol worship. It was a significance on them to say, well, we're following this God, and so he's saying, get rid of those things. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Jacob and his family had gotten in trouble. Simeon and Levi had kind of, murdered a lot of people. So Jacob was afraid that he was going to get attacked, and God protected him as they traveled. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, the promised land. He and all the people who were with him, and he built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. It's an interesting distinction. God calls him to Bethel. Bethel means the house of God. Beth is always the house of. Elohim would be God, so the house of God. Now he says he builds an altar, and called the place El Bethel, which means God of the house of God. So there's an interesting distinction there, and think about it for a second. Before, Jacob had come to the house of God. Now, Jacob was coming to God, the God of the house. Kind of a neat distinction. Before Jacob was coming to the house of God, now he was coming to God, the God of the house. And the play on that for you and I is, we can come to church, but are we coming to God? The old saying, there's a couple different versions of it. Just because you go to church doesn't make you a Christian. Just like standing in a garage doesn't make you a car. Or standing in McDonald's doesn't make you a cheeseburger. So we can go to church, but are we coming to God? And that's the distinction here that that kind of rings true in my heart. We've all had dry seasons in our life where we've just been purely obedient to say, I'm going to go to church. And sometimes God meets us there, and it's like, wow, I went to church. And sometimes we're more intentional about saying, no, I'm going to meet with God today. I love our gathering space. We've been here 6 months. I was just sitting here this morning going, what a cool little space God has given us, And it is a neat gathering space, but it's just a space. Are we coming here to engage with God, to spend our time singing our songs unto Him, exalting Him in praise and worship, and to learn from Him? Are we coming to the house of God, or are we coming to God who's in this house? Something that we need to consider. Verse 8 says, Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Alon Bachuth. Alon Bachuth. This is the only mention of Deborah that we have, Rebekah's nurse. She would have played a big part in Jacob's upbringing. She would have been a pivotal part as Jacob was a child. Rachel's handmaid, Rachel's nurse. Without mom around, especially as mom has passed while he was in Paddan Aram, Deborah would be a sweet reminder to Jacob of his time when he was young. And so I'd imagine that he asked Deborah to join his group, to join his pack. And now she too is going the way of us all. We all, the stats are true. 1 out of 1 of us dies. 1 out of every one of us dies. So that she too is passing along, and I'm sure this is a sorrowful time because he calls the place Alon Bakuth, which everybody knows what that means, right? I had to look it up too. It means terebinth of weeping. So, tree of sorrow, oak of crying, whatever you want to say. And so, it's an indication that this broke Jacob's heart, She was sweet to him. And so, he mourns over that. Continuing on, verse 9 says, Then God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Paddan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, Your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. So he called his name Israel, a reminder of that night of wrestling when Jacob surrendered his name and was renamed as Israel, governed by God. Also God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you, and to your descendants after you I give this land. It's a reminder of the promise that God had given to his grandfather Abraham, now 3 generations strong. We see God intercede in behalf of these men's lives. Each time he speaks to Abraham, reminds him of the promise. He speaks to Isaac, reminds him of the promise. Now he's speaking to Israel, and reminds him of the promise. We gather together to remind one another of the promises that we too have in God. It's a joy when we can come together and say, all right, let's remember what God has done for us. Let's see if this works. I've got to turn it on.
Yay, technology.
Yay, technology. I don't know. All right, I'm just going to read it to you. Hebrews 10, chapter 10, verse 23, 24, and 25. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. We, as Calvary Chapel family of God, believe that the return of the Lord is at any moment. It's possible for him to come back. The stage is set. So as we see that day approaching, as the signs of the times would tell us that it can't be far off that God would be returning, we continue to meet together. We continue to encourage one another. We continue to remind each other of the promises of God. I was just curious. Okay. Verse 13. Then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone. And he poured a drink offering on it. And he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him, Bethel. So this is just a reminder of the events that had taken place. Jacob pours out a drink offering. That's the first time we have this reference in the scriptures since we began the book of Genesis. On the physical plane, a drink offering is a complete waste. You take a cup, you take a bottle, you take a skin of wine, and pour it into the dirt and let the dirt absorb it. That's what a drink offering is. And on the physical, it is a complete waste. You don't get it back. You don't lap up the dirt and to enjoy the wine, right? So it makes no sense on the physical. The ground swallows it up. But on the spiritual side, it's a symbol, it's a sign of complete surrender, a way of saying, God, all that I have is yours. Everything that I'm pouring myself out to you. In fact, that's what Paul says in 2 Timothy chapter 4. Paul says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I have kept the faith. My life is a drink offering before you. 2 Timothy 4, 6, and 7. And so Jacob pours out a drink offering as a symbol to God to say, yes, my life is surrendered to you. Look at verse 16. Then they journeyed from Bethel. Wait, what? They journeyed from Bethel? God has spent all this time trying to get Jacob back to Bethel. In several chapters we've been reading the journey back to Bethel. And now he's leaving?
Oh my God.
All this time, I thought that was special, I guess. That was interesting timing. All this time going to the house of God. But think of it. Now that he's gone to the God of the house, it's okay to be sent out. God wanted him to come back to the house of God to meet with him there. And now that Jacob, Israel, has met with the God of the house, it's okay to be sent out. It's all right to be, the word we would use is commissioned. Right? And when we've met with God and God has moved over our hearts, the natural response in our lives is that we would go and make disciples of all nations, that we would fulfill the Great Commission. And so I guess it makes some sense now that he's met with the God of the house to be sent from Bethel. So they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. And one thing we can note here is that life is not without travail, though you now walk with God. We have families going through difficult times and trials right now, and we have all experienced hardship over our lives, even though we have been surrendered and devoted to God. Life is not without travail, though you now walk with God. Rachel, on the move, very, very, very pregnant, is now having an issue. It's ultimately going to end in her death. It's not without trials that we have this life. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor, the baby was coming, that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, you will have this son also." And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem. So they were headed south to Bethlehem, the house of bread. And so several things to note here. Rachel passing is actually the fulfillment of a promise that Jacob had made. It took several years to happen, but you'll recall, I mentioned already, when Laban chased after him and said, "Why have you stolen my household gods?" What did Jacob say? "Whoever has your gods shall die." Rachel had gods. And though it wasn't fulfilled in that moment, and though it wasn't fulfilled at Jacob's hand, it was eventually fulfilled. And she, as a young woman, is dying in childbirth. She wanted to name him Benoni, which means son of sorrow, as she recognized that she would not survive this birth. And Dad overrides Mom here to say, no, we're not going to name him son of sorrow, because ultimately he would become the bright spot of Jacob's life. And so he names him Benjamin, which means the son of my right hand. The one who sits on my right side. A symbol of strength, a symbol of authority. You think Jesus sits down at the right hand of the Father. That's a symbol of authority. And so that's what he names him, Benjamin, the son of my right hand. But imagine Jacob's heart in this moment as he's grieving now the loss of his favored wife, Rachel. Verse 20 says, "And Jacob set up a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day." You got to remember who's writing the book of Genesis. Remember? Moses. Moses writes the book of Genesis. In fact, Moses writes the whole of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, as a history to remind the Israelites of how far they had come. And so, as Moses is writing this, he says, Rachel's altar, the stone of remembrance, Rachel's grave is still there to this day, to the time of Moses writing this book. And in fact, Rachel's tomb is still there to this day. You can go visit it as you go and tour Israel, as you move down to the house of, or to Bethlehem, on the north side of Bethlehem. Rachel's tomb is still a stopping point for tourists today. So it's still marked, they still know where Rachel, one of the matriarchs of Israel is. This is an interesting chapter. 4 burials, 3 funerals in this chapter. 4 burials, 3 funerals. So they buried the idols, right? They buried the idols, and then Deborah, Rachel, and Isaac are all going to pass in this chapter. So it is the way that we eventually will all go, should the Lord tarry. Okay, then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Notice something. It was Jacob, verse 20, who built the pillar, but it's Israel who makes the journey. And Jacob's perhaps now saying, okay, it's time to move on. I'm completely surrendered to God. I'm obedient to where he would have me go. And so he is making the journey. And it happened when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben, that's his firstborn, went, and it's not just a sandwich, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. Now, we call chapter 34 the deplorables, and we continue to see deplorable action on behalf of this family. Reuben, the oldest, does this unimaginable thing and goes and lays with his dad's wife, his father's concubine, Bilhah, one of the servants that had been given to him through Laban. Jacob hears about it, Israel hears about it is what it says, but perhaps he's at the age where there's not a whole lot of fight left in him. I don't know for sure how old Jacob is at this point, but he hears the news and doesn't seem to react. He doesn't say anything about it right now, but he will. When he is getting ready to go the way of his fathers, he pronounces a blessing or a curse on all of his 12 sons. And in Genesis chapter 49, this is what he says of Reuben. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power, unstable as water, you shall not excel. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So this, though he doesn't say anything in the moment, this stays on his mind for the rest of his life, this act of Reuben, and eventually as he's handing out the blessings as they passed on from generation to generation, he says of Reuben, you know what? You don't got it, buddy. Yes, you're my firstborn, but you don't have the firstborn's rights. You're not going to excel. You defiled me. It's interesting to note, think about this now, the order of the 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, have all now incriminated themselves. Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, Simeon and Levi were the ones that destroyed the people while they were healing from the circumcision. Now think about where the Messiah comes from. The next born, Judah. Reuben, Levi, Simeon essentially eliminated themselves from having the rite of passage for the Messiah to be born. The fourth in line is Judah, and the tribe of Judah and the Messiah will ultimately come from the line of Judah. Interesting to note. Now we get the names of the sons here, each in accordance with their mother. Now the sons of Jacob were the sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservants, were Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, were Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan Aram. So these will now eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. A rather sordid group, if we're honest. A rather not a great resume on this family. A rather dysfunctional family. It's a reminder for you and I take a little bit of hope in this, in that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. God doesn't call the qualified. This wasn't the stellar family that he pulled out of everybody. He qualifies the called. And He changes their hearts and changes their lives as He has changed Jacob's. It says in verse 27, Then Jacob came to his father Isaac in Mamre, or Kirjath Araba, which is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had dwelt. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Last time Dad saw Isaac he thought he was dying. Remember, that's when the whole switch thing happened, and he put goat's hair on the back of his neck and whatnot. That's about the last time, or at least recorded, that he saw Dad. And at that point, Isaac thought he was dying. Isaac lives another 40 years, and now here he is, about to die at 180 years old. So Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, being old, you think? And full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. That's kind of cool. Reconciliation had been made between Esau and Jacob. Now the brothers are able to come together to mourn their father, and so they do. And then we come to chapter 36, which is an interesting chapter if you've read ahead. Second Timothy 3:16 would say, all scripture is God-breathed and given for inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. And then you read Genesis chapter 36. And I don't doubt that it's God-inspired, and I don't doubt that there is reason that it is in the record. But sometimes you gotta scratch your head and go, why? Why do we need the genealogy of Esau in the middle of this? And why do we have 722 different names to read? I didn't count them, that was just an exaggeration. But it's just like, sometimes we've got to scratch our head to figure out what the benefit of particular verses or chapters are, because they are inspired for our benefit. And this is one of those chapters, and so you'll have to beg my pardon, but we're not going to read all of it. Genesis 36:1. We will skip some of it. Now, this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Okay, that's something to cling on to. We can talk about that. We will in a minute. Esau, everybody remembers who Esau is. This is Esau, Jacob's brother. Okay, Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. Aholibamah, the daughter of Anah, the daughter of Zibeon the Hivite. And Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebajoth. Okay, everybody got it now? There'll be a quiz on it at the end of the service. No open book, you have to know the names.
Does spelling count?
Spelling does count, absolutely. Aholibamah.
Better than half of them.
Okay. Moving along. Esau takes 3 wives, one from the Canaanites, one from the Hittites, and one from the Ishmaelites. Do you know the Canaanites? Do you know the Hittites? Do you know the Ishmaelites? They're always named as perennial enemies of Israel. And Esau finds his wives among those tribes. In fact, if you want to take it even a step further, verse 1 tells us that Esau becomes Edom, and the Edomites are very strong enemies of Israel as well. Very, very strong. So that's what we can glean from this chapter, is we're getting the lineage of the enemies of Israel. Verse 4, now Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reuel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household, his cattle, and all his animals, and all his goods that he had gained in the land of Canaan, went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. God had taken care of Jacob so well under Uncle Laban that he had this huge flock. Remember the gift that Jacob gave to Laban? 580 animals, and it didn't even put a dent in his herds. And so there's this huge family and farm of Jacob. And then God had taken care of Esau as well. And blessed Esau in many different ways. Though he wasn't the promised one, though he wasn't where the line of God was going, he still blessed him and he still took care of him. He was still a son of Abraham eventually, also rather. And so he blesses him mightily. Both of Isaac's sons have been blessed abundantly, so much so that they have to separate because there's not enough grass to feed the animals. God had taken care of Esau as well. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. And he reminds us again, Esau is Edom. And this is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in Mount Seir. So this is now the third reminder that we have that Esau is Edom. Remember, Edom means red, I think, if I remember correctly, but he's big, hairy, red dude. That's Esau. And now he's reminding us that this is the Edomites. And the benefit I can see of this chapter is that reminder that he is Edomites. The brothers who wrestled in the womb continue to contend with one another throughout their lives, though at present they are in peace. But ultimately, their contention will continue for thousands of years beyond the death of Esau, beyond the death of Jacob. Really, to this day, there is still contention between the descendants of Esau and the descendants of Jacob. To modern day. Something of note to consider. Herod, the one that issued the decree that said to kill all of the Israelite boys 2 years old and younger at the time of Jesus. You remember that part of the story? Herod is an Edomite. Herod is a descendant of this family. So it is a continuous contention. And especially, or even at the time of Jesus, we can see that. They dwell at Mount Seir. You and I would call that Petra. If you're familiar with that name, this is the same place as Petra. A virtually impenetrable defense place. It's a way that the rocks come together in that there's only one entrance into this area, and 12 guys can defend it against a whole army. And so that's where he is. Though the Edomites controlled the land for a long time, one day we know it's going to be ultimately used by God to supernaturally protect his people. All right, verse 10, we're going to skip down to verse 31. Because you don't want to see me mess up all those names. Verse 30 at the end says, these were the chiefs of the Horites according to the chiefs in their land. A lot of chiefs, a lot of kings, a lot of names I can't pronounce. It says in verse 31, now these were the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Israel. So another distinction between the Edomites and the Israelites was Edom established themselves as a monarchy. They established kingship over their heads. That was not the intention of Israel. When God established Israel, he set it up as a theocracy, governed by God. And that's the very name of Israel in itself. He said, I will be the government for the nation. And eventually the people get rid of that and say, no, we want to have a king just like everybody else around us. They fall into that as well. But that wasn't the way it was established. So verse 32. Bela, the son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was that. And when Dinhabah, right? Okay, cool. And when Bela died, Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, reigned in his place. And the reason I read that at this moment is because some people, in verse 33, think that the Jobab there is Job, as in the book of Job. I don't see a real possible connection for that. The people that I listen to and read would say, no, that isn't the same guy here. Some people think that that's perhaps Job. All right, so verse 34, skip down to verse 43, and the end of verse 43. These were the chiefs of Edom, according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Fourth time we have this reminder. And so now the scene is going to shift back to Jacob, and now the transition is going to come in as we begin to look at Joseph. And as we look at Joseph, just to kind of set the stage, I love the story of Joseph, and I think if you're not intimately familiar with it, you will as well. When we're done with this in a few weeks, the parallels between Joseph and Jesus are incredible. And so Guzik would say it this way as we set the stage. Thus begins one of the remarkable life stories of the Bible and truly of all literature. He was loved and hated, favored and abused, tempted and trusted, exalted and abased. Yet at no point in the 110-year life of Joseph did he ever seem to get his eyes off of God or cease to trust him. Adversity did not harden his character. Prosperity did not ruin him. He was the same in private as in public. He was truly a great man. Joseph nearly is the hero that we're looking for in the scriptures. There is some character flaws. We'll actually point out one today. But really, Joseph, as you look at the whole of his life, does amazingly well. Guzik goes on to say, Enoch shows the walk of faith. Noah shows the perseverance of faith. Abraham shows the obedience of faith. Isaac shows the power of faith. Jacob shows the discipline of faith. And so along these lines, we could say that Joseph shows the triumph of faith. Joseph never complained and never compromised, and he is a remarkably powerful picture of Jesus. So Genesis 37:1, a few verses here. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan, that is the land of promise. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. We're going to know, if you are familiar with the story, Jacob's sons all hate Joseph. The other 11 despise Joseph, and you're going to see why as we establish here. You're going to see the reasoning for the hatred of Joseph that will eventually send him to Egypt. Where does he start, or where does the story start out? The little 17-year-old brat is a tattletale. Right? Evidently, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah were doing something out in the field that Joseph didn't like. We don't know what the event or circumstance was, but he goes running home to dad to say, well, and that's why your brothers or sisters wouldn't like you. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of his old age. And so he made him a tunic of many colors. We see this favoritism again, right? And we've talked about this several times over the past few weeks, that the ugliness of favoritism. And Jacob has learned from Isaac, who learned from Abraham, that to show favoritism among his children. It really is kind of sad. But here he says, I love Joseph. And that's another reason his brothers didn't like him. And so Jacob makes Joseph this tunic of many colors. And yes, I'm going to do it. It was red and yellow and green and brown and scarlet and black and ochre and peach and ruby and olive and violet and fawn and lilac and gold and chocolate and mauve, cream and crimson and silver and rose, azure and lemon and russet and gray, purple and white and pink and orange and blue. I had to write it down. You guys have it memorized. So, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, in case anybody wasn't picking up on that. Donny Osmond, right? Anyway, I say that because that's not really what the quote was about. The real idea behind the ancient Hebrew phrase for a tunic of many colors is that it was a tunic extending all the way down to the wrists and ankles, as opposed to a shorter one. This was not a working man's garment. Jacob here is telling him, you're privileged, you have status, you rise above everybody else. That's the meaning behind the gift, and that's another reason his brothers end up hating him. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. The animosity is building. Now, Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaf stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Sometimes privilege can create a lack of tact. Sometimes being blessed or having this air of haughtiness can help you or keep you from seeing those that are beneath you. Sometimes privilege creates a lack of tact, and Joseph seems to have no discernment for how his brothers would receive this dream. Hey guys, come here. I had this great dream. You all bow down to me. Note that the dream includes the sheaves of wheat, and that, if you think about where we're going, Joseph's rise to power is centered around grain, is centered around food, is centered around wheat. So the dream is appropriate, but he lacks tact in this moment. And he doesn't stop there. Verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father, hey Dad, and his brothers. His brothers rebuked him. Shut up, kid. And said to him, what is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you, to the earth before you? So if telling dream 1 was not the best idea, then telling dream 2, not a good idea either. While many things about Joseph's life reminds us of Jesus, this isn't one of them. And if there's a character flaw when he's this young, it's understandable. But I would see one here. Jesus wants us to live others-centered. The call of our lives is to make God first and make others second. To live others-centered. And Joseph is rather self-centered in this moment. Let me tell you about these amazing dreams where you all bow down to me, not considering how the other people would receive the dreams that he's had. It says verse 11, and this is our last for today, and his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. They hate him, they envy him, they envied the favored treatment his dad had given him. Dad pondered all these things, he kept it in mind as a parent would, as Mary did. Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart of Jesus. Jacob and sons, right? Another reference to the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Jacob and sons. They're not the qualified group that you would think they should be. But God is in the redemption business. Right? God is in the redemption business. And if you've looked at your life and go, God, I don't know how you could do anything with my life. I have so messed it up. I have done so many things wrong. I have failed in so many ways. I have fallen. I have come short. Well, God can redeem your life as well. He is in the redemption business. He can reclaim your life for His glory. We have friends that live out in Lafayette, Indiana, right? That own a coffee shop, and the name of the coffee shop is Christian Coffee Shop is Reclaimed. I just love that word. They've made the sign out of parts they got at the junkyard, but the idea is that God reclaims our lives when we surrender to Him, as Jacob is now surrendered to Him, living as Israel. He is in the redemption business, and we will get to see how all of that comes together. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the call. Qualifies the call. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. And He can do the same with our lives as well. It is surrendering to Him and saying, no longer will I live with a foot in each world. No longer will I be my own man on Monday through Saturday and yours on Sunday. He wants the whole of our lives, all of it to be surrendered unto Him. And it is at that point that God can say, now I have something I can use. Let's stand, let's close with prayer. We thank you, God, that you are in the redemption business. For none of us are worthy of your presence, God. None of us have done well enough in our lives that we can rightfully take a stand in heaven. But through Jesus, the Son who lived the perfect life, the one that died the criminal death that we might have life. It is through Him that we can have forgiveness and redemption, that we can be reclaimed unto you, God, and fellowship can be restored. We rejoice in that. We celebrate that, Lord. We thank you that you've stepped into the story of our lives and wooed us back unto you, Lord, to have relationship with you. And we want to be instruments in your hand for your kingdom and for your glory. And I pray for anybody that's in this room or for anybody that is watching online today that maybe they haven't taken that step of faith. Understand that God went to great lengths to redeem you, to reclaim you. He sent His Son that you might have life everlasting. And it's a matter of stepping in faith to say, I want to receive that gift. I want to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And surrender your life to Him to live evermore for His kingdom and for His glory. If anybody has questions about that, I'd love to speak with you. God, go before us as we leave this place. Guide us. May we be instruments in your hand. We sing, we love you, Lord. We pray that we would show it with our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you, oh my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Love you guys. Go live for your King. Have a good week.